President-elect Donald Trump and his allies have already begun laying the groundwork for his incoming administration's diplomatic efforts on a host of international issues, one of them being Ukraine. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky met with President-elect Trump for their first in-person discussion since President Trump's decisive victory last month. Now, the meeting, which was about a half hour long, was good and productive, according to a tweet by Zelensky. He added, quote, "We all want this war to end as soon as possible and in a just way," end quote. So what might the coming Trump administration, how might the Trump administration impact this war between Russia and Ukraine? Joining me now to discuss this is freelance war correspondent Chuck Holton, who is in Ukraine. In fact, he's traveling back from the front lines of the conflict. Chuck, great to see you. Welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be here.
Now, I know you're on the road traveling back. What is the latest in this conflict, this war between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, we just came from the eastern front lines just to the east of Kramatorsk today, where we went out with a chaplain to visit the troops along the front line and bring them some Christmas goodies and just some encouragement out there. And I talked to a bunch of troops who have been out there for the whole war, many of them. One guy told me he'd seen his family 3 times in the last 12 months, and they are living in very miserable conditions out there. You can imagine it's very cold here, about, what is it right now, 29, 30 degrees, something like that. And they're living in holes in the ground and just being pounded by artillery and drones for the entire time. We actually saw some of those drones today, and we're in between artillery barrages going back and forth. So in talking to those guys, I first of all wanted to gauge what their sentiment is about the war. And they're tired, but they are, for the most part, still very committed to trying to finish this war in a way that will ensure that their children will never have to go fight this war again sometime in the future. And what they don't want to do is affect a Afghanistan-style pullout, by trying to declare the war to stop without it actually being over, which is what they're being pressured to do from many sides. And so while they are exhausted, they're very tired, and they would very much like the war to end. They don't want it to end in a way that negates all of the sacrifices that have been made already. Secondly, I asked them what they hoped that Donald Trump would do about it. And you would think from some of the comments made by people on the right and during the election cycle about abandoning Ukraine, they would have been pretty reticent to support him. But they're actually excited to have Donald Trump take office, and they are really hoping that he will be able to do something to make a difference.
So is their sense, as he is calling for a ceasefire, for an end of this war, that means he's going to be applying pressure to the Russians as well? Is that their take on this?
Well, he would have to get them to come to the negotiating table, because right now, Vladimir Putin's not really what he says has to happen in order for there to be a deal is essentially for Ukraine to lose. And so, if Ukraine gives up, then we'll stop fighting. And obviously that's a non-starter for the Ukrainians. Russia has already got a lot of pressure on it in terms of their economy and the sheer cost of this war. The last month, a lot of media outlets were saying that Russia has taken more ground in November than in any other month since the beginning of the war. However, what that represents is only 1/800th of the remaining land in Ukraine. And so at the rate they're going, it would take them about 66 years to take the rest of Ukraine. And at the losses they're sustaining to do that, they would lose 32 million soldiers in the process over that 66-year period. So obviously that's not sustainable for them. They're losing upwards of 1,000, 1,500, even 2,000 soldiers a day in this conflict. And so while they are making gains, it's super costly. And what the Ukrainians we talk to are hoping is that Donald Trump can put some pressure on Russia by threatening to open the spigots of oil production in the United States, drive down the cost of oil, because Russia is already selling oil at a 30% discount. And they wouldn't be able to survive.
That's a real possibility. I think that will happen. And I think that will have a greater impact, not just on Russia, but that's going to affect Iran. That's going to affect a lot in the geopolitical sphere internationally. But from the Ukrainian perspective, what would be acceptable in terms of bringing this war to an end?
Many of them have said to me today, we understand that we are not strong enough to take back Crimea, and we're not going to win a war of attrition against Russia being much bigger than we are. And so we're willing to make a deal now and hope that at some point we'll be able to diplomatically be able to get back our territories that are being occupied. But some of the soldiers we talked to said, you know what, I've got family that are in the occupied areas. And so, no, I'm not willing to just abandon them to the vagaries of Russian occupation and wait for a diplomatic solution. So there was some disagreement among the troops on that.
Chuck Holton, we just have about a minute left. The sense of believers, of Christians there on the ground, what's the spiritual situation like?
We talked to a pastor who is also a chaplain of the Good News Church in Kramatorsk, which is right about 7 miles from the front lines. And he said that before the war, they had 700 people going to their church. It's an evangelical church in Ukraine. And that when the war started, everybody fled. But there were a lot of people in the city of Kramatorsk who stayed behind that were not churchgoers. And they started coming to the church looking for help and assistance. And they were able to get that help and assistance, whether it was clothing, food, supplies, whatever. And so he said, we have an entirely new church of about 200 people now who are coming to our church that never came to church before. So God's using it in a good way.
Chuck Holton, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll be praying for you and all of the folks there in Ukraine.